I've recently made the return to Final Fantasy XIV. I got my Black Mage caught up to level 70 and I played through the most recent expansion, Shadowbringers. Now I'm completely addicted and it's the Final Fantasy XIV community that helps keep you invested. Today I want to share my experiences and thoughts on playing through the expansion itself. I'm going to keep this as spoiler free as possible. Here's a chart on what will be discussed, but I will get into proper spoilers near the end of the video and I'll give warning for that. Once I've pulled myself away from minigames at the Gold Saucer, I can start. I've had a great time with the Shadowbringers base game. I haven't done the endgame or extended story at the point of making this video, but that's next. So as typical with Final Fantasy XIV, the story doesn't initially grab you, but that's only because it takes the time to slowly build up something brilliant. And every now and then you'll get little sneak peeks into a larger, more grandiose story that we'll have to deal with later down the line. Throughout the entire journey from level 70 to 80, I very rarely did any generic quests. You know, those typical MMO quests, kill 10 boars or fetch 8 apples. There were some very light fetch quests, but all the cutscenes and story moments made them enjoyable. All the generic quests are restrained to side quests, and they're completely optional. You can see the evolution from old Around Reborn quests to Shadowbringers, where there's much more variety in quests, and even completely new types of quests. You've got puzzles to solve, boulders to run from, minigames, epic little scenarios where you get to play as story characters, and nightclubs to party at. Wait, what? The storytelling is the high selling point of Shadowbringers, and I'll just say this now, I think Final Fantasy XIV's story is better than the last few Final Fantasy games, which were single player. It's much harder to tell a good story in an MMORPG compared to a single player RPG, so pats on the back for the writers, devs and designers. So my experience begins in Lakeland. It very quickly hits you hard with its vibrant mix of colours. I'm quickly led to the Crystarium, which is the new major city of Shadowbringers. I like it and it's got a pretty chill atmosphere and music. I'm looking forward to spending a bit of time hanging out here before Endwalker. I can remember being excited watching the previews for this city in the very original Final Fantasy XIV tech demos about 15 years ago, so it's very nice finally seeing this city take form and become a part of the world. We've got the brand new world of Novorant to explore. It's a world overwhelmed with light, and as usual we've got 6 zones to work through. The zones are visually pretty good, and they all feel completely different from each other, with very strong diverse themes. My favourite zone would be either the Aether-rich Lakeland, or possibly the Bioshock-inspired Tempest zone. A lot of my favourite MMO worlds, including Shadowbringers, are split up with very colour-coordinated zones, and it just keeps the world fresh and dynamic. Not to mention, as you progress the story of Shadowbringers, the regions themselves evolve and update. And there's the Aether Currents scattered about to collect too. They're pretty fun to collect, and once you've earned them all, you unlock the ability to fly in that region, which gives you a completely new perspective to appreciate the world. That said, I do feel the game world is sadly showing its age a little bit with some rough textures and rough edges here and there, which is odd, because when it comes to the visuals in dungeons, they're on a completely different level and look incredible. That said, the dev team are currently working on getting the infrastructure and foundation into the game for better graphics and ray tracing, so looking forward to that in the future. Okay, so my character, I'm playing a Black Mage. They're a bit like glass cannons, all out offensive with powerful destructive magic. In Shadowbringers, I get a few new spells and passives, which help me maintain my rotation, which I'm really thankful for. I get a second polyglot slot, which allows me to slowly build up and store a special magic resource called a polyglot. And I've got 2 very powerful new spells, Despair, which is so powerful it drains all my mana, and Xenoglossy, which makes use of those polyglots. Both spells have a powerful feedback to them whenever you blow stuff up. All this polyglot and Xenoglossy talk must be incredibly confusing for non-Black Mages. It's about day 2 and we meet Emmett Selsh for the first time. He's a very interesting and unpredictable character, and let's just say the writers deserve a lot of praise, not just for Emmett Selsh, but the character developments across the board. Characters I originally hated about 8 years ago, I now respect after everything we've been through and all their developments. It's not long after that I reach my first dungeon too, Hallminster Switch, a tranquil village under attack by the forces of light. I'm introduced to the trust system, which allows you to run story dungeons with NPCs instead of grouping up with other players. I wasn't expecting this. I have mixed feelings on the trust system. My big issue is simply that it takes the game further away from being an MMO by allowing you to replace players with NPCs, but I can see the positives too. For instance, in the far future there might be less players about. Players might have moved on to an entirely new Final Fantasy MMO, similarly to how people moved from Final Fantasy XI to 14. And being able to skip queues for looking for groups is kind of useful. It does take longer to do a Trust Dungeons bosses, so it's pretty good practice to learn boss mechanics before you do the real deal with players. And on the topic of bosses, every now and then the game's music has certain beats that remind me of the music in Final Fantasy VIII, in particular the dungeon final bosses themes. The soundtrack, as always, is awesome. So being around the new world of Shadowbringers, there's a few memorable experiences. Amalrang, this is a desert-based zone where I met a Hrothgar. That's one of the new races based on Final Fantasy X's feline race, the Ronzo, and this Hrothgar is grieving and drinking himself to death over his dead wife. There's the oddly familiar Kalusha, where the variance between the rich and poor is a core theme of this region. There's the mysterious and chillaxing Tempest Zone, where it feels like I'm playing in Rapture from the Bioshock series. I'm a big fan of Bioshock 1 and 2. There's the Swampy Forest, Raktika Greatwood, which is the home of the second new race, the Viera, which are bunny girls based on Final Fantasy XII. And there's also the fairy-occupied Ilmeg, which looks pretty brilliant illuminated at night. But if you want to know the full story of what's going on in Novarand, you're going to have to discover and experience that for yourself. A few days into Shadowbringers and it's time to take on my first 8-man trial, Titania the Fairy. I watched a strategy video before the fight. I made a few minor mistakes, nothing too bad, but we end up wiping a few times and I'm reminded how awesome the Final Fantasy XIV community is. So the strangers I'm grouped up with stick through it, offer advice and tell us how hard this was at Shadowbringers launch. I think if this was a similar situation in say modern day World of Warcraft, some people would have just left the group or had something cheeky to say. The Titania fight itself was pretty good. They managed to make fighting ads pretty interesting with huge tree-type enemies. I'd say Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers has been worth it just for the base story alone, even if you don't want to partake in endgame. But through the journey and friends you make along the way, you might just change your mind and be convinced into some endgame. It felt good being in a completely new world with our story team of scions. There's so much attention to detail with the writing. In between cutscenes you can optionally speak to story NPCs to hear their views and opinions on the current situation. I'd go as far to say that the story is at the same level of a good single-player main entry Final Fantasy, and that is high praise. I'd even argue there's a better story here than in Final Fantasy XII, 13, and even 15. Right, about time we got into spoiler territory. Be warned, you might want to skip this part of the video if you haven't already done the Shadowbringers base story. At first I didn't really like the visuals of the Ilmeg Fairy Zone, but after you clear the mist and light it becomes a much nicer zone. There's the story battle where you take control of Thancred, holding the line against the tertiary antagonist, Ranjit. It was pretty epic, I just wish all the speech was voice acted in the battle. It's kinda hard to read his lines while you're fighting. Throughout Shadowbringers you're accompanied by the spirit of the original Warrior of Darkness, who shares his insight and he's looking for his purpose. Gotta feel a bit of empathy for this guy, especially in his final moments. In Kalusha, we have the story of the rich manipulating the poor. The huge scumbag Vorthri flees to Mount Gulg. I was not expecting the story to escalate so much, with us climbing the giant rock Talos to siege his palace. This is a dungeon that leads directly to a trial face-off with Vorthri, a pretty awesome fight where Vorthri takes on the power of the light and sheds some weight in a jaw-dropping sequence mid-gameplay. The final dungeon looked awesome. We start in a ruined city and end up in outer space with our final encounter with Emmet Selch. He really was an awesomely written villain, and in the end you kinda have this mutual respect for each other after a really desperate struggle. I knew the summon Hades was in the game, but I was not expecting Emmet Selch to suddenly reveal himself to be Hades out of nowhere. That was an oh shit moment.
I am Hades. Show your vaunted strength, and I shall expose the lie of your fragmented existence.
Every few levels you get a bit of insight into our A Realm Reborn and Heavensward characters, Gaius and Anstinian. These guys have epic big scenes, and after completing the main story I'm praying that I'll get more story with these guys in the Shadowbringers extended patch story, and hopefully I don't have to wait until Endwalker. So that's been my experience with the Shadowbringers base story. I'm now need to start farming some gear, Beastman dailies, etc. And I'm about to start endgame and the extended story, which I'm looking very much forward to. If you're a big Final Fantasy fan, check out my mega video on Final Fantasy VII. But for now, peace.